Okay, today we're going to start on Tzadik Zayin Amid Aleph on the bottom of the page. Tanur Rabbana, Rakik Shigia Barakik. If a wafer of a mincha touched another wafer, one was puzzle. Okay, so we thank Hashem that we're able to learn Torah every day. This chus of our learning, we should have the basic mikdash immediately. And should be well. It says that if a one type of wafer, one mincha, touches another one, or a piece of meat touches another piece of meat, so then it will become, if it absorbs, what was the expression in the Mishnah? The entire piece doesn't become aser, ein aser l'makim shabala, only the part that absorbed, only the piece that absorbed. Okay, so Tanur Rabbanan. Start in a brisa. Torah says, Kol asher yiga, anything that touches the flesh of the carbon chatas, yikdash, will become holy. That's the pasuk that says the word yikdash. In this we learn that if a piece of carbon touches, so the piece that it touches will get that holiness. Well, yachal afilu shlei bala. Maybe this applies even if it touches, but it doesn't absorb. It doesn't absorb inside. Talmud Leimar bibisara. It has to get absorbed. Bibisara is coming to teach me that only if it's absorbed. Adshi yibla, till it gets absorbed, bibisara, into the other sacrifice, into the other piece of meat. Yachal naga b'miktas chaticha yekule pasel. What happens if a piece of a puzzle carbon touches another piece? Just a part of it. A piece of a puzzle carbon touches a piece of a kosher carbon. Do we say that it's entirely puzzle and everything becomes puzzle? Talmud Leimar, we don't say that. We say yiga. A negeya puzzle. Only the part that touched is puzzle. Haketzad. What do you do with a piece of a carbon that touched a puzzle carbon? So you cut off that edge that touched it, and then the rest is going to be kosher. Okay, easy. Bibisara. When the pasuk said bibisara, in the flesh, that we learned from that only was absorbed, we also learned from that that it's only the flesh that touches another piece of meat that would make the laws of this carbon go on to that piece of meat. But not if the sinews or the bones or the horns or the hoofs touch. That doesn't spread over. There's only the edible part of the sacrifice that spreads to the other one that would have apply the laws of Naisar and the limitations of the carbon. Then it says Yikdash becomes holy, to have the same law of the first one. Haketzad, how does that work? Impsuli, that if the first carbon that touched the second one was puzzle, then the piece of meat becomes puzzle. And if it's kasher, then you're going to have the stringencies of it. So basically what we learned was like this. I have two pieces of meat. Here we're going to show it as white. So we learned that if one touches the other one, two pieces of meat, one touches the other one. Let's say this one is the chatas, okay? So if it touches this, so the edge of this is going to become puzzle, only the part that absorbed. If this chatas is puzzle, then this is going to become puzzle. If this is not puzzle, and it touches a regular piece of meat that's chulin or shlamim or something else, then it's going to have all the stringencies of a chatas. But only if it's this piece here is a piece of meat, not if it's a horn or a bone or a sinew or something like that.
Yeah, so far this sounds a lot like the halakas of ta'aruvos.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. We learned some of the things. Some of the things are quoted. For example, there was the Shitas Balaiter, I think, that held that kashering, that if you ever cook something parav after a fleshik thing, your pot becomes parav. Cook something parav after you cooked fleshik, and then you use it for milk. So the pot was parav because you cooked something else. And he learns it from these gemaras here, where you by the karban chatas. It was in Tzadik Aleph, I think.
But it seems like if it really were the same, the Gemara would say that, doesn't it?
Yes
Somewhere.
and yes and no. Yes and no. The place can quote it. So in the place can you'll see the sugya brought like we had yesterday. But bashal v'lei bala.
Right.
That was quoted. Okay. The Gemara asks, why do we say that if one piece of meat touches another piece of meat, that all the laws of the first one apply? So, for example, if the first one was puzzle, now the second piece becomes puzzle. I have a positive command to eat a carbon. I have a negative command not to eat a puzzle carbon. Positive command to eat the carbon should override the negative command, and I should eat it. Amar Rava, so Rava says, the rule that we quoted, which is a very common rule, a very popular rule, that a positive command pushes off a negative command, that rule doesn't apply in the Beis Hamikdash. Shenemar, and I'll prove it to you, because it says about the carbon Pesach, it says that you can't. Morning. You can't break a bone. Yeah. No, Zavachim. I have one over here. Holding on Tzadik Zion Amid Beis. Says that you're not allowed to break a bone in the carbon Pesach. So 1 second. I can't break a bone in the carbon Pesach. The problem is Reb Shimon ben Menashe says it doesn't matter what type of bone it is, whether it's a bone that has in it marrow or a bone that doesn't have in it marrow. You're not allowed to break the bone. Now, 1 second. There's a mitzvah to eat the carbon Pesach. Now, if there's marrow in the bone, then the asay, the positive command of eating the carbon Pesach, should override the negative command of that you're not allowed to break a bone. You should have to break the bone to get the marrow out. That's a positive command. So why don't we say that a positive command, pushes off a negative command? So the Gemara says, rather we say that this rule of a positive command pushing off a negative command doesn't apply in the Beis Hamikdash. We're on Tzadik Zayin Amid Beis, right by Rav Ashi. It's like 5 lines up from the white lines. Rav Ashi Amar. So we had a question over here. We're talking about go up right over there. Rav Ashi.
Okay. Rav Ashi Amar.
We had a question that if a treifa carbon touches a puzzle carbon touches another kasha carbon, so the kasha carbon becomes puzzle, and you can't but you can't eat it. It becomes like the puzzle one. So we said why? We should say asay is dechalesa. Say you have a mitzvah to push it off. So we say it doesn't apply in the mikdash, as we proved from the carbon pesach. Rav Ashi Amar. Rav Ashi says yikdash, when it says anything that touches the first carbon becomes holy, just like it. So we say that is also a positive command. See, we were viewing that there's a negative command, there's a negative prohibition to eat a puzzle carbon. Okay, we'll accept that. The only thing is that when the puzzle carbon touches the kosher carbon, that's a positive command. That says it becomes like it. That's a positive. So a positive to eat it can't push off the negative of not to eat it plus a positive not to eat it. In the not eating it, there's a positive and a negative. And a positive only pushes off the negative, it doesn't push off a negative and a positive. Okay. Now we go through until the end of the parak. We go through how do we know that this law applies not just to the korban chatas, which the pasuk was referring to, but also to all other korbanos. It says ashkechan chatas the miskadish bebeloah. We find so far what we've been learning is that if a piece of a korban chatas touches another piece of meat, so the other piece of meat becomes like the korban chatas and it takes on all of those restrictions. How do we know that it applies to other ones? Shar kachim minalan. How do we know that it applies to other korbanos as well? Amar Shmuel mishum Rabbi Eliezer. Shmuel says the name of Rabbi Eliezer. Well, that's jumping back a few generations. It says the pasuk says Zayis Atayra at the end of the section of korbanos. It says Zayis Atayra la'ila minchas chatas lashem al mulam masevach shlamer. So the Gemara learns from that because it just lists all of the sacrifices. This is the law of all of the sacrifices. It says that all of them are compared one to another. All of them are. We start with the Oila. The first mention over here. the other Gemara say Hukshu kol hakabanos zelazeh. They're all compared one to another. We start with the Oila. La Oila. Everything is like the Oila. Ki Oila ma Oila tuna keli. Afkal tuna keli. Whenever you bring a sacrifice, you need to use a service vessel, a kli, whether for the dam, or if it's going to be for the mincha. As it says in the pasuk, it says mincha as well. It needs to be put into a keli. The kaimetz needs to be put into a keli. The mincha needs to put in everything. You always need a keli. My keli. Gemara says, which keli are you talking about? Hilim and mizrak. Are you talking about the bowl that's used to sprinkle the blood? It says, I know that from another source. It says by the Shalmi Tzibur. It says Vikach Moshe Chatzi Hadam Bayasam Baganis. Moshe took half the blood. This is by the Shlamim that was brought by Matan Torah. What's the ches over here? Yeah, Nari Yisrael. Yeah, this is by Matan Torah. After Matan Torah, they brought Moshe took half the blood and he put it in a bowl, in which was then sprinkled. So you see what's put into a bowl. So we have another source for this. The Gemara says Ella the sakin. Rather, we're talking about the knife. That just like korban oila needs a knife to be slaughtered, so too every sacrifice needs a knife. What is it coming to exclude? Like what else could we use? We'll see in a moment, I think. How do you know by the oila you need a knife? Wow. Look at the source for this. That Avram, when he was bringing Yitzchak to the Akedah, he used a machelas. Machelas is a knife. So it says V'hasam Oilo, and over there we know that it was Oila D'ksiv Vayal Le'ola Oila Tachas B'nai. It says that when he brought the ram, right? He brought the ram after the Akedah. He didn't. The Malach says don't offer Yitzchak. So he sees the ram. He brings the ram. It says that he brought it as an Oila in place of his son, which means that his son was the Oila. And by his son, by Yitzchak, he was using a machelas. Okay, so now we move to the next word in the pasuk. We did already. Oila tells me that you need to use a knife. Mincha. It says ma mincha einenech al zichrikuna afkal einenech al zichrikuna. By the korban mincha, it says that it's eaten by kol zachar yochal eisei kodesh yelach. It's eaten by a male, by the male koyanim. So, the Gemara asks, Maihi, which korban do you need this information for? That it doesn't say it specifically, and the mincha is going to teach me that this korban also needs to be only eaten by male kohanim. Which one are you referring to? Ichatas v'asham. If you're referring to a chatas and an asham, a guilt offering, a sin offering, and a guilt offering, it says clearly, Kol zachar b'kohanim yechlanu, that you need a male kohen to eat it. So I don't need a pasuk by mincha to teach me that a chatas and a asham need to be zachar kohen zichri kahuna. Shalmi tzibur, maybe it's talking about the shalmi tzibur. Miribuya the cross. That I know from another source. It says, and it says in that pasuk, the extra words of that pasuk teach me that you use the male kainim zichrikuna. So what are we learning from the carbon mincha that's unique? So the Gemara says Tanai. It's actually a machlekes Tanaim. What's the source for the Shalmi Tzibur that it's eaten only by Shalmi Tzibur is the karbanos that are brought on Shavuos, right? The shlamim, the two sheep that are brought. What's the source for that? That it's only by male kainim. Where it says ikadanafkalei mihacha, ikadanafkalei mihacha. I have actually two sources. Some learn from the pasuk that says kodesh yalach, and some learn from mincha. Okay, we're up to the third word of the pasuk. It says chatas, and this is why we're quoting this whole thing is just for this word. It says chatas. Ma chatas miskadeshes bebelua. Just like a carbon chatas that gets absorbed inside another piece of meat, it consecrates the piece of meat that it got absorbed into. Afkal miskadeshes bebelua. So too, every sacrifice it applies to. Very good. That's exactly what we were looking for. We wanted to know, how do we know that this halacha that we're learning in this parak applies to other karbanos? We got it from the word chatas in the pasuk of Zeis Teres Eila. Zeis Teres. What was the pasuk? Zeis Teres Eila Minchas Chatas Asham Lamlo Musavach Shlam. Asham. We're up to the fourth word. Ma Asham Ein Shpir V'Shelia Kadesh Bay. Afkol Ein Shpir V'Shelia Kadesh Bay. This is a little odd. This says like this: that if I have a carbon and I shecht it and I open it up, and inside you find a fetus. So, and in the fetus, you open up the fetus. In the fetus, you find the parts of the carbon that need to go on the mizbeach. Now, those pieces of that need to go on the mizbeach was from the mother, not from the fetus. How do I know that? So I know that by the carbon asham. Carbon asham is a zachar; it's a male sacrifice. So just like by the carbon asham, where it's no possibility for the shpir, the fetus, or the placenta, whatever is there, to become consecrated, because it's impossible, because it's a male. It's never going to have that. So too, in every sacrifice, we're not going to say that the fetus is going to be consecrated. And I would have to offer the fats and the kidneys and other parts of the fetus onto the altar. I don't say that. The Gemara explains, Kasavar, obviously this Rabbi Eliezer that Shmuel is quoting, that darshans this pasuk, because he holds blood is kadashim, babiyasin in kadashim. He holds that the offspring of sacrifices only become holy after birth. They're not holy in utero. And so therefore, where does he know this from? V'dan an efsher mishi'i efsher. This is a concept that sometimes we find in the Gemara where we want to learn one thing from another thing, and it's a comparison. It says just like over here it doesn't apply, so to over there it doesn't apply. Only problem is that the comparison isn't always perfect. We're learning just like by the Asham, which is a male sacrifice, a male animal. We don't have any shpir v'shelia, we don't have any fetus inside. So too, any sacrifice where the fetus doesn't become, just like by the Asham, the fetus isn't holy. Why is it not holy? Because it doesn't exist. So too, by the other sacrifice, the fetus isn't holy. 1 second. But over there, it's efsher. Over there, it's impossible. Efsher is like ein efsher, efsher. It's impossible. Impossible. Over here, it is possible. It's not a good comparison. The Gemara says no. Done in efsher mishi'i efsher. I can learn a case where it's possible from something where it's impossible. It's still teaching me halacha. I know over there it's different, but nevertheless, it can still teach me the halacha. Lamiluim, it goes on to speak about inaugural offerings. Mamiluim Maisreyem Bisreifa. Maisreyem would mean the flesh, the skin. Everything else gets burnt by the inaugural offerings. It was only the parts of the sacrifice that are offered onto the altar, very specifically, that are put on the altar. everything else gets burnt outside. So ve'ein balechayim b'meisrayim, and the laws of consecrating an extra animal, which sometimes people do just in case they lose the first one, they would consecrate another one, and that other one also gets on the holiness. That doesn't apply to inaugural offerings, because they never did that for a communal offering. They never consecrated an extra offering just in case. That's like we said. That's what husbands do when they go to the store to get something. If says they get this type of onion, they don't know. Is it the sweet one or is it the purple one? They have to get both, or else they're gonna have to go back to the store. So when it comes to a karban, let's say I don't know which one. They consecrate both of them just in case. So you never did that for a communal offering. So if that's the case, that halacha is going to apply just like by miluim. You don't have the extra offering. Afkol meisrayim b'sreifa ve'im balachem meisrayim. Person consecrates two animals. One of them is just in case. So the second one will not be required to be burnt. In other words, a regular inaugural offering, everything that's left over is burnt. But there's no such thing as balechayim that are left over, live animals that are left over. So too, every other sacrifice, if there's something left over, which it is possible, but it's not burnt. Okay. Now we learn l'shlamim. Number 6, probably. It says ma shlamim mefaglin umispaglin, just like a shlamim could become pigel if we have the wrong thoughts, and it will also make the nesachim that's together with it also pigel. Afkal mefaglim umispaglim. So too, the thoughts by every karban will make the nesachim that's brought with it pigel, and also it itself becomes pigel. Okay. The Masnisa Tana, the main part of this brisa was the chatas. The main part that we're quoting is the chatas. Masnisa Tana Mishmei Rabbi Akiva was taught in another brisa in the name of Rabbi Akiva that mincha miskadesh bebelua afkol miskadesh bebelua. But we thought the main thing was by a chatas. We have another brisa that says that the mincha, when it gets absorbed in another sacrifice, consecrates the other sacrifice. So too, every other sacrifice, the same thing would apply. And it would be necessary to learn both of them, to learn from both of them. Good morning. We need 2 coffees today. So the Yashmin and Mincha, if we'd only say a carbon Mincha, is Lior. Not this time. The Yashmin Mincha, if we would say Mincha, just the Mincha, you would think I did the Rekiva Mivla. Since it's soft, it could get absorbed into something else, and so therefore it consecrates the other thing. Aval Chatas, a Malay, but by Karma Chatas, which is actually a piece of meat, a slab of a steak, I would say maybe it doesn't get absorbed. The Yashmin Chatas, it would say a Chatas, Mishum de Karir, because anyone have a translation of karir?
Karir, like cold or?
Yeah, I thought it was cold, but Rashi uses a French word here, and let me see what they translate. Mechalchel. Mechalchel means like it melts.
With a chaf?
No. Oh, mechal. No, with a ches. Yeah. He wanted to say like satisfied. Just saying, yeah. No, over here it means that it's seems like the fat would get absorbed into it.
Karir.
Over here, I think karir actually means hard or thick. Because it's hard, and the fat gets when one piece touches it, another piece touches it, so it gets absorbed deeply inside it. So then I would say that you can't get it out. And so that's why it becomes consecrated. Abel mincha emalai. Say maybe by the carbon mincha, maybe it doesn't get absorbed in such a thick way. Maybe you could maybe scratch it off or something, or squeeze it. So tricha, it has to say both of them to tell me that whatever it is, whether it goes in deeply or it doesn't go in deeply, if one touches another one, you have to be concerned about the absorption, and it's consecrated like that. Okay. Now we have a question. Lechatas. First, the Brisa continues, and then we're going to ask on it. It says everything is compared to a chatas. Ma chatas ein ba ela min achulin. You see, according to Rabbi Akiva, that he learns from the carbon mincha belua. What does he learn from chatas? So just like the chatas can only be brought from a mundane animal, ubayayim, and the sacrifice needs to be brought by day. Ubayadi ayamanis, and the sprinkling of the blood is only done with his right hand. Afkal ein ba ela min achulin ubayayim uvayadi ayamanis. So too, every sacrifice can only be brought from a mundane animal. It can only be brought by day, and it's sprinkled with the right hand. Chatas minalan. How do we know these three halachas? By a chatas. Amar Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda says, Amar Kra, Vikr v'Aaron esparach. Rav Chizda is a Zakayim, actually. It says, Vikr v'Aaron esparach chatas ashelai. Aaron brought the chatas. What does it mean ashelai? That was his. It says mishalai. That means that it was brought from a mundane animal, an animal that was his. Yeah. We're
past that.
Yeah.
Because it's come from Aaron. How do we learn any of those things?
So we're learning right now.
How does that teach us about bringing it with the right hand, for example?
That's coming up. We didn't do the right hand yet. First, we're learning just that it needs to come from a mundane animal, which means that it's coming from his own money. His own money means that it's personal, not that it's not blame Mishal Tzibur, blame Mishal Maisa. It's not coming from the community. It's not coming from Maisa. That means that it was a regular mundane animal. Second halacha, Bayayim. Where do we learn Bayayim? It says Bayayim Tzavaisai. On the day that the Jewish people were commanded to bring the sacrifice, Nafka. That's where we learn that needs to be brought. Oh, I'm sorry. This is a question. Bayayim, you're telling me that we're learning from a carbon chatas that it needs to be brought by day. B'yom tzavasi nafka. We learn it from b'yom tzavasi. We have another source. I don't need the chatas to teach me to other sacrifices. I have a source for all sacrifices, independently of the chatas. It says kedi naspa. That's said just because kedi means for nothing. Sometimes we have phrases that get brought together. Like, for example, Cher Shaita V'Katan. So we're talking about a Cher Shaita V'Katan. Sometimes the law doesn't apply. For example, it says that a person has to have bru or vu. He has to be multiply. He has to reproduce, procreate. So it says, but what happens if his child is a Cheresh Shaita V'Katan? What he gave birth to is like not isn't going to end up getting married or something. It's a Cheresh Shaita V'Katan. So does it apply over there? So that's the quote that it said. 1 second. Katan. Every child is a katan. It says, oh, that's just said because that's part of the phrase. There's a phrase Cheresh Shaita V'Katan that gets put in. So when we said over here, we said that it needs to be his own. From Menachulin and Bayayim and Biyadai. Kedi, you said it along. The main point was something else, but it's just part of the phrase. Kedi Naspa. It was tags along. Iba Yesema. I'm sorry, I skipped. Biyadai Hayamanas has to be with the right hand. Midirabba Baruchana Nafka. I have another source for this as well. Damar Rabbi Chana Reish Lakish. Rabbi Baruchana says the name of Reish Lakish. Kol Makom Shnemer Etzbo Koneina Ein Al Yamin. Whenever it says in the Torah, etzba, and it says kahuna, and since it needs to be with the right hand. Now, since every carbon it says kahuna, so I always know the right hand. So why do you have to learn from chatas that it's the right hand? It's always the right hand. The Gemara says kedi naspa. You're right. I actually don't need to learn it from chatas. That was also, now it's a little odd because now you have two things that are not necessary, if I had 3 items in total and one of them wasn't necessary, I say, okay, that's how the people talk. But now I have only one thing that's necessary and 2 that aren't necessary. That's a little odd to have a whole list of things and only one of them was necessary. Iba Yesema, another teretz, Savra law that Rabbi Akiva, that we were learning this from, is he holds like Reb Shimon, he holds like his student Reb Shimon Damar, Etzba v'lay baikuna. When it says in the Torah Etzba, I know it's the right hand. It doesn't need to say kuna, but kuna by Etzba. But if it says kuna, that doesn't tell me it's the right hand unless it says Etzba. So in other words, I really learned from the word Etzba that it needs to be the right. Etzba means the finger. I learned from there that it needs to be right. But if it says kahuna, which it says by all the karbanas, that doesn't teach it to me. We were thinking that Rabbi Bar Bachana said in the name of Rish Lakish, any place where it says Etzba u kahuna, we thought it meant either one. Now we're saying it's not either one. It's if it says Etzba, that's good. But if it says kahuna, it needs to say Etzba and kahuna. Okay. And by the karbanas, it doesn't say Etzba. Asham, what does the Rabbi Kiva do with Asham? Ma'asham atzmaisav mutarim. Just like from a carbon asham, you're allowed to make bone china out of the bones of a carbon asham. Yeah. Right? The bones aren't considered nicer or they're left over.
You say with the handles.
Right. So afkal atzmaisav mutarim. Also, all karbanas, you're allowed to make. You're allowed to make kalim. You're allowed to make china out of the bones.
Going back to Etzba, are we talking about the going?
So by the carbon chatas, he would actually dip his finger in and do that. By the other ones, he used the keli, the sprinkle. And so therefore, how do I know that you need to use the right hand if it doesn't say the word etzba? I learned from, it says chatas. And it says, this is the law of all of the sacrifices. It says each one is teaching me a law that is the general law for all of them. And just like the chatas needs to be the right hand, so too all the sacrifices need to be the right hand. Yeah.
Like sprinkled with the right hand, or like
yeah. Okay. Yeah. And the chatas was applied by the finger, by actually wiping it. The other sacrifices were spritzed.
Spritz.
Yeah. Is that an English word? Okay. We're on top of Tzaddik Chesed Beis. When I first learned this Gemara, I learned it wrong until I saw the Rashi. It says Dam Chatas Lamata v'Dam Oila Lamata v'Dam Oila Lamaila. The way I understood it first was that the Dam Chatas goes above the, mistakenly understood. The Dam Chatas is always above the middle line, and the Oila, the Oila Spehema, is below the line. Actually, what we're talking about now is we're going on to another discussion here. We said that if blood spritzes on a garment, the garment needs to be laundered. And where does it need to be laundered? In the Beis Hamikdash itself. Right? That was you weren't supposed to take it out. It needs to be tzarich kibus. It needs to be laundered right there. Now, this is the law that applies to the dam chatas. The Gemara asks, the Gemara says like this: dam chatas lamata. If the first thing that spritzed on the garment was the dam chatas, blood of the chatas, and then the dam oila went above it, on the same stain, you have oil on it. Yeah, you have the pshat on the stain. Yeah. So ton kibus, it needs to be laundered because the chatas got absorbed into it. Oy Rava says dam oila. Rava has a question. Dam oila lamata v'dam chatas lamaila. What happens then? Let's say the oila got on it first. Does it require kibus? Because the oila doesn't require tibus, it's only the chatas. It's not the blood of all the sacrifices, it's only the blood of the chatas. So here, the stain that was there was the stain of the oila, and on the stain of the oila, blood of chatas. Bishum nageyahu, do we say that it doesn't matter? The fact is it touched the garment, so now it needs kibus. V'ha nageya, and it touched it. So oidilma, or perhaps mishum baluo, because of absorption. V'halei bala. But the chatas didn't get absorbed because it was already wet from the oila. can absorb once it's saturated.
In saturating what? In the barochas, or where is he like saturating it?
So he's talking about where he was going to do a sprinkling, and a little bit of the blood spritzed on his garment.
Oh, in the.
So the rule is that that garment needs to be laundered. Pasuk says, "Chabis b'makom kadosh," that has to be laundered in the hazara. Question over here is it laundered because of absorption, or is it laundered because of touching? In other words, is it like a mikveh, or is it a washing machine? So that's the. The question is, if it got absorbed into it, if the oila got absorbed into it first, so that it was already saturated, can't absorb anymore. So Hadar Pashta, Rabba then answers his own question. Ein te'unen kibas. It does not require. It does not require because it only has to do with absorption. Amar Rava. Rava then says, Pshitali, the following is obvious to me. This usually means that he has a question coming up. It's obvious to me. Damal bigdai chaitzitz. If someone has to put his garment in the bridge was up. If there's blood on his garment and he wants to put the garment in the mikveh, so that's going to be a chatzitza. It's going to be it's going to interpose between the water and the garment. However, in tabachu, if he's a sheichet, ein a chaitzitz. One of the rules of chatzitza is that it's only something that's makbid, something that you don't want there, something that's typical. It's not a problem. So sometimes we're going to learn in a second, but the first thing that we're learning here is that if there's blood on a garment, so no one wants blood on the garment, that would be a chatzitza. However, a sheichet that always has blood on his garments, he walks around like that with blood on his garment, sort of like a painter would have paint on his shoes, and he doesn't even bother taking it off. That's how he goes around. A mechanic always has like the hands are a little black. That's how he is. For him, he doesn't care. He's so used to it. It doesn't care. Everyone else would like spend an hour washing it off, but for him, he doesn't do that. It is what it is. So he's already not makbid, right? So here what we're saying is a tabach that has a butcher that has on his garment blood. It's not considered a chatzitza because he's not makbid. Revav, if there's some sort of fat or grease al begadai on his garment, so chaitzitz, that's a chatzitz. V'meicher revavu, and if he's a guy that sells grease, then ain't a chaitzitz. It's not a. Who would that be today? Someone sells grease. Who sells grease? I think they're just a mechanic. The guys that own oil mills.
The restaurants for the fries.
And the gas station people, right? Boy, Rav. So Rav has a question. Dam uravav al big daimaha. What happens if for Hanukkah, for the donuts?
Yeah.
If let's say there's both, there's blood and grease on his garment, what's it then? Im tabachu, if he's a butcher. So 1 second. We said that a butcher doesn't mind the blood, but teipaklei mishum revav, but he does mind the grease. There's grease. The meicher revavu, and if he sells grease, teipaklei mishum dam, you say there's blood. He doesn't want the blood there. Everyone, even though they still have their standard. Blood is a different story. So it's going to be a chatzitza. The Gemara says, we're talking about someone that's a butcher that also works in the gas station. So achadalei kapit. He doesn't mind if he's dirty from one thing. However, atarti, but if he's dirty from two things, kapit, that's he's going to mind, right? Maybe even though there's one thing, but he would be careful not to have both. Or maybe such a type of job that he doesn't care. He has blood and grease on the same garment, and he doesn't mind. Teiku. The Gemara leaves this as a question. Okay, a little more time. So let's try to learn the Mishnah. For a page and a half, or 2 pages behind. It's full yaid. Tul Yaim is someone that went to the mikveh. What's wrong? Oh.
Sitting here.
I have the same thing all day. Don't worry about it. No, I teach ninth grade.
But it was tolerant of others.
Intolerant. Okay. Naftali, you're missing out on what's going on. Okay. Tvul Yaim, someone that he went to the mikveh, but he has to wait for nightfall to become tar. Like we learned in the first Mishnah in Brachas, that Kayan, that's Tameh, before he can eat this Truma, he has to wait for nightfall, even though he went to the mikveh. It's called the Tvul Yaim. Mechusar Kippurim. It's a little bit more than the Tvul Yaim. Tvul Yaim, someone that went to the mikveh and needs to wait for nightfall. Here, he already waited for nightfall. But the following day, he has to bring a karban. For example, if he was a Zav or he had Tzaras, he has to bring a karban before he's allowed to eat from karbanos. So these two people, Einam Cholkim B'Kadshim Lechol Erev. Even though later on that day they're going to be able to eat, so right now they can't. So they can stand. They would like to stand in line and get their portion, and say, "I'll eat it later." Right? Imagine a Kayan is in the Beis Hamikdash, and they saw you just drank a cup of coffee, and meanwhile they're handing out the steaks from the shlamim. So he gets into line. He says, 1 second, you're milchik. He says, no, I'm going to eat it in an hour. I'll eat it a little later. Stands in line. That's probably allowed. But over here, he's not eligible. He's not eligible until later. Okay.
Till nightfall?
Well, by the Mechusar Kippurim, until after he brings the karban. The Tvul Yaim is until nightfall. Depends on what type of tumah it is. Einain. Let's say if Kayin is an Einain, that means a close relative passed away on that day. So it says Naigeya. It's the word Einai is not supposed to be there. It says Naigeya. He's allowed to touch the sacrifice. In other words, he's not tamei just because a relative passed away, unless he was actually tamei, unless he was in the same room as the corpse, as the deceased. He's allowed to touch, but ve'ene makr, but he's not allowed to offer. Ve'ene chelak, he also doesn't get a portion. Lechal erev, in order to eat it that evening. He's not eligible to eat it now. He doesn't get a portion. Balei mumin, let's say there's a kain that's a balmum. Yeah, like one leg is longer than the other. Or the eyes are different sizes, or whatever. All these types of mumim, right? So, or balei mumim, or let's say it's a balmum that is only temporary, as a broken limb is in a cast or something. Balei mumim kavum, whether it's about ben balei mumim, ben balei mumim, whether it's permanent. Cholkim, va'ichlem, they're allowed to get a portion. They do get a portion. They are eligible to eat. Avalei makrivim, they're just not allowed to do the service. Anyone that's not eligible to do the avodah doesn't get a portion. The balei mumim. Gemara's going to ask that. Anyone that doesn't get a portion of the meat, also ein lai ba'irus, doesn't get a portion of the hide. The hide of the animal would go to the kohanim. But in order to get the hide, you would need to be eligible to get the meat. And to say, I can't eat the meat, but at least give me the hide. Because the hide, I'm going to tan it later. I'm going to make, wallets and belts and shoes.
Torah scrolls
As well. Tefillin boxes. Batim, right? Afilu tamei b'shas richas adam b'tar b'shas hekdech lavim. Even someone that was tamei at the time of sprinkling of the blood, but he became tar at the time of the burning of the fats. He also ein achelik b'basar. He doesn't get a portion of the meat. Shenemar hamakar v'stam hashlamim v'sachilav mibnei Aaron lo yisi ashekayim in lamana. The one that offers the blood, he's the one that can get the right thigh as a portion, which is referring to the part of the animal that the kohanim get from every sacrifice, from every karban, every sheikayim. Chazav v'shaik. Yeah, chazav v'shaik. They get from the shlamim. He has to be tar at the time of the zrika. Let's see if we can go jump further. Okay, no, let's leave it over here. Tzadik test. Okay. Have a good day. Right at the top of Tzadik test.
And onus doesn't matter if you didn't like.
Tell me.